Emily Carter was only 13 when she vanished without a trace, but she wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. On a quiet summer evening in 1997, 13-year-old Emily Carter vanished without a trace from her suburban home in Richmond, Virginia. The Carters lived in a peaceful neighborhood where doors were often left unlocked, and children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. It was the kind of place where people felt safe. That night, Emily's parents, Mark and Linda Carter, had gone out for dinner at a restaurant just 15 minutes away. They left Emily alone, something they had done a handful of times before. She was a responsible girl, mature for her age, and had never given them a reason to worry. They promised to be home by 9. At 8:57 p.m., Linda called the house phone to check in. The phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. She figured Emily was in the bathroom or watching TV too loudly to hear. Nothing seemed unusual. At exactly 9:12 p.m., Mark pulled into the driveway. The porch light was on, and the curtains in the living room were drawn. Everything looked the same as when they had left. But when Linda unlocked the door and stepped inside, an eerie feeling washed over her. The house was silent, too silent. The TV in the living room was still on, playing the end credits of a movie. A half-empty glass of orange juice sat on the coffee table, condensation dripping down the side. A book lay open on the couch, as if Emily had just set it down. Her shoes were by the door, her backpack still in its usual place. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place. And yet Emily was gone. Mark checked her bedroom, calling her name. The bed was untouched, the window locked. The bathroom door was open, the lights off. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. The back door was locked from the inside. It was as if she had simply vanished to thin air. Panic set in immediately. Linda dialed 911 while Mark ran outside, calling Emily's name into the darkness. Neighbors came out of their homes, flashlights in hand, searching the yards and streets. Within the hour, police arrived and began their own search. They combed through the house, checked the surrounding area, and questioned everyone in the neighborhood. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. No strange cars, no unfamiliar faces. Investigators scoured Emily's room for clues. They checked her journals, her school notes, even her computer, but found nothing suggesting she had planned to leave. There were no signs of an online predator or a secret friend she had confided in. It wasn't long before law enforcement ruled out the possibility of a runaway case. If Emily had left on her own, she had taken nothing with her. No clothes, no money, not even a jacket. And if someone had taken her, they had done so without leaving a single trace behind. Days turned into weeks, and the search efforts intensified. Flyers with Emily's face covered every telephone pole and bulletin board in the city. News stations picked up the story, interviewing tearful parents and concerned community members. Search parties scoured the woods, lakes, and abandoned buildings within a 50-mile radius. But there was no evidence, no leads, no suspects. Emily Carter had simply disappeared. It wasn't until months later that the first clue arrived. A cryptic letter with only 4 words changed the course of the entire investigation. 3 months had passed since Emily Carter vanished, and hope was beginning to fade. The case had gone cold, with no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence to suggest what had happened to her. The Carters had exhausted every possible avenue, working with private investigators and pleading with the public for answers. Then one morning, a plain white envelope arrived at their doorstep. There was no return address, no postmark, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Mark Carter opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just 4 words written in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. "She is still alive." The police were immediately called, and forensic experts examined the letter. It contained no fingerprints, no traceable ink, and no DNA. Whoever had sent it knew exactly what they were doing. The message was maddeningly vague. Was it a cruel hoax, or was it real? Was Emily being held somewhere, or had she escaped and sent the note herself? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery. More letters followed. Every few weeks, another envelope arrived, always with a short cryptic message. Some were unsettling, like, "She is watching," and "The puzzle is almost solved." Others were more personal, containing details only Emily could have known, like the name of her childhood stuffed animal, or a secret hiding spot she used when she was little. The Carters clung to the possibility that Emily was alive and trying to reach them. But if that was true, why couldn't she say more? Why couldn't she tell them where she was? The postmarks offered no clues. Each letter had been sent from a different state: California, Texas, Florida, Ohio. It was as if someone was moving constantly, staying one step ahead of the authorities. The FBI considered several theories. Maybe Emily's abductor was taunting her family, enjoying their suffering. Maybe Emily herself was being forced to send the messages, or maybe she had developed some kind of attachment to her captor and wasn't trying to escape at all. None of the possibilities were comforting. Then, one letter changed everything. Unlike the others, this envelope contained more than just a message. Inside was a Polaroid picture. The image was dark and grainy, taken in a dimly lit room. A girl sat on a bed, her face half hidden in shadow. Her hair was longer, her frame thinner, but her eyes were unmistakable. It was Emily. Mark and Linda collapsed into tears at the sight of their daughter. The FBI analyzed the photo, searching for any identifiable details in the background: a wooden headboard, faded floral wallpaper, a single window covered with thick curtains. It wasn't much to go on, but it was proof of life. The problem was, they had no idea when the photo had been taken. Was Emily still in that room? Had she already been moved? The letters continued, but the messages became stranger. They referenced places Emily had never been and people she had never met. It was as if someone was playing a game, leaving behind pieces of a puzzle with no clear solution. Investigators worked tirelessly to track the sender, but they always seemed to be too late. The person behind the letters was careful, methodical, and impossibly elusive. Months turned into years, and the letters became more erratic. Some were handwritten, others typed. The handwriting varied slightly, making experts wonder if multiple people were involved. Then came the final letter, unlike any of the ones before. Instead of a cryptic message, it contained a single sentence written in a different, more controlled script. "It's almost time." No one knew what it meant, but the FBI had one lead to follow: the locations of the postmarks. And when they finally mapped them out, the pattern they formed was something no one expected. The case had reached a frustrating dead end when independent journalist Sarah Whitmore stumbled upon something that changed everything. She had been following Emily Carter's disappearance for years, obsessing over the details, convinced that there was a pattern everyone had missed. While studying the locations of the postmarks from the letters, she began mapping them out on a large U.S. atlas. At first, they seemed random, scattered across different states with no clear connection. But when she stepped back and looked at the bigger picture, she noticed something chilling. The locations formed a nearly perfect star shape across the country. This was no coincidence. Someone had planned this. Sarah immediately contacted the FBI with her findings. Investigators, initially skeptical, re-examined the letters using advanced geographic profiling techniques. The pattern was too precise to be accidental. It suggested intent, a deliberate design that had gone unnoticed for years. The FBI intensified their efforts, using the newly discovered locations as potential points of interest. If the sender had gone through the trouble of creating this pattern, there had to be a reason. They focused on the final point on the map, the one that would complete the shape. It led them to a small, nearly abandoned town in Montana. It was a desolate area, the kind of place where few people lived, and even fewer passed through. Among the handful of rundown buildings was an old, seemingly forgotten house. It stood alone at the edge of town, its windows boarded up, its front porch sagging from years of neglect. There were no signs of recent activity, no indication that anyone had been inside for a long time. But the moment the FBI stepped through the door, they knew they had found something significant. Dust covered most of the house, but one room was different. It was clean, almost eerily so. A small twin bed sat against the far wall, the sheets neatly tucked in. The floral wallpaper was faded, peeling in some spots, but the most disturbing feature was the collection of drawings pinned across the walls. Each one depicted a girl, always the same girl, sitting alone in a dark room, sometimes with a shadowy figure standing behind her. The sketches were crude, childlike, and filled with unsettling detail. In some, the girl had no mouth. In others, her eyes were completely blacked out. On a dusty wooden desk, the FBI discovered a metal box filled with cassette tapes. Each was labeled with a date, spanning over 2 years. When they played the first one, the room filled with the sound of a young girl's voice. It was Emily. The recordings varied in length. Some were just a few seconds of heavy breathing, while others were full conversations, though she was always speaking to someone who never responded. The tapes were unnerving. Emily talked about books she had read, places she remembered from childhood, and then in later recordings, things became stranger. She spoke about dreams that felt real, about voices whispering to her in the dark, about memories she wasn't sure were hers. The last tape was the most disturbing. Emily's voice was trembling, barely above a whisper. "I know who you are now, and I know what you want." The tape ended abruptly. There were no more recordings, no more letters, no more signs of Emily. Whoever had been controlling this game had either finished playing or had moved on to the next step, and the FBI still had no idea who they were dealing with. The discovery of the house in Montana sent shockwaves through the investigation, but the most unsettling question remained unanswered. Where was Emily Carter? The house held traces of her presence, but there was no sign that she had been there recently. The tapes suggested she had been kept in captivity, but no one knew if she had escaped, been moved, or if something worse had happened. The FBI combed through every inch of the property, looking for any DNA evidence, fingerprints, or signs of who had been living there. In a closet, investigators found a locked wooden trunk. It was heavy, the metal clasp rusted with age. When they pried it open, they discovered a disturbing collection of objects. Old, faded dresses in Emily's size, a hairbrush with strands of dark blonde hair, a stack of children's drawings, all featuring the same unsettling images of a shadowy figure looming over a young girl. Most chilling of all was a collection of newspaper clippings. Every single article written about Emily's disappearance carefully cut out and preserved. Whoever had been here had been following the case closely. They wanted the Carters to keep searching. They wanted the attention. Despite the eerie atmosphere, there were still no real leads. The house had been abandoned for weeks, maybe even months. The last letter had arrived nearly a year before the discovery of the tapes, and it was unclear whether Emily had ever been in this house or if it was just another breadcrumb in a larger, more sinister game. The FBI knew one thing. This wasn't the work of an ordinary kidnapper. This was someone meticulous, someone who planned every move years in advance. Then another breakthrough came. In a hidden compartment inside the trunk, they found a single Polaroid. Unlike the previous one sent to the Carters, this photo was clearer. It showed Emily standing outside, her expression blank, almost dazed. Behind her was a wooden fence with a distinct pattern. Investigators enhanced the image, scanning records for any similar structures in Montana. Their search led them to an old farm, just 30 miles from the abandoned house. When agents arrived, the property was eerily quiet. The barn doors creaked in the wind, and the farmhouse looked as if it hadn't been occupied in years. But inside the barn, they made another disturbing discovery. A chair sat in the center of the room, thick leather straps attached to the armrests. The walls were covered in tally marks, hundreds of them, scratched into the wood. And on the ground, buried beneath dust and hay, was a small silver bracelet. It was one Emily had been wearing the night she disappeared. The presence of the bracelet confirmed that Emily had been there at some point. But was she still alive? A more thorough search of the property revealed hidden tunnels beneath the barn, narrow passageways leading deep underground. The air was damp, the walls lined with scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. At the end of the tunnel, there was a small empty room with a single word carved into the wooden floor. Run. Whoever had been holding Emily had either let her go or she had escaped. But if she had, why hadn't she come home? Where had she gone? And why had no one seen her in years? The FBI knew they were getting close, but what they didn't realize was that the truth was far more terrifying than they ever imagined. The discovery of the underground tunnels beneath the barn changed everything. It was now clear that Emily had been held in captivity for years, but there was no indication of who had taken her or why. The word run, carved into the floor, suggested she had managed to escape. But if that was true, Why had she never resurfaced? Where had she gone? The FBI expanded their search, combing through nearby forests, abandoned buildings, and remote towns in hopes of finding even the smallest clue. They were running out of time. Then a shocking call came in. A woman at a gas station in Wyoming had reported seeing a disoriented young woman matching Emily's description. She was barefoot, wearing tattered clothes, and seemed afraid to speak to anyone. Before anyone could approach her, she disappeared into the woods behind the station. The surveillance footage confirmed what investigators had feared. It was Emily. After nearly 7 years, she was alive. Authorities swarmed the area, launching a massive search effort. They followed tracks into the dense forest, but she seemed to vanish once again, as if she had been living off the grid, avoiding human contact. But why? Had she been running from her captor all this time? Or was something else keeping her in hiding? Then, another disturbing discovery came to light. Investigators, desperate to understand the strange pattern of the letters, the tapes, and the locations, re-examined every piece of evidence. That's when they found something they had all overlooked. Hidden within the tapes, buried under layers of static and background noise, was another voice. It was barely audible, distorted beyond recognition, but it was there, a low, murmuring presence that seemed to respond to Emily's words in the recordings. Experts enhanced the audio, isolating the mysterious voice. What they heard sent chills down their spines. It wasn't just a voice, it was a name. Over and over, the distorted whispers repeated it. Amelia, Amelia, Amelia. Emily had no middle name. She had never gone by Amelia. But someone or something had been calling her that. Had she been conditioned to believe she was someone else? Was this part of a psychological manipulation? The revelation sent investigators down an even darker path. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place, an elderly woman in a Montana nursing home who had seen the news about Emily's case. She contacted the FBI with a story that at first seemed impossible. She claimed that decades ago, in the same region where Emily had been held, a young girl named Amelia had disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. The police had searched for years, but she was never found. Then, nearly 20 years later, another girl vanished. Then another. A horrifying theory emerged. Was this a cycle? Had someone been taking girls, erasing their identities, and replacing them with the next victim? If Emily had escaped, did she believe she was someone else now? Was that why she hadn't come home? As authorities pushed deeper into the mystery, the pattern became undeniable. Every 20 years, a girl vanished, and each time the letters began again. Emily Carter was no longer missing, but the real question remained. If she had survived, who had she become? And more importantly, who was next?